Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every Doctor Who story from the classic era, plus a bunch of Big Finish stuff, and apparently some BBC radio stuff. One episode a day, 7 days a week, and today, on the 16th of April 2018, we are starting the second story of Season 8, the Third Doctor's sixth story with The Mind of Evil, starting with Episode 1. Now, The Mind of Evil is written by Don Houghton, the guy who wrote The Invasion, and the first episode is a very, very good follow-up to The Invasion. We have the Doctor and Jo arriving at a prison. They're arriving at a prison because there has been an advancement in techniques with, crime reform. They're coming to see a demonstration of the Keller process, which takes a bunch of negative impulses, takes them out of the mind, and puts them in this giant box. Now, where this episode starts off as really, really, it starts off as a really intriguing story, is that the Doctor he's already realized that, hey, this is too good to be true. There's no way that this box is, just this magical thing that can magically cure all these illnesses. So he, it magically cures people of these impulses. And he even questions, well, if the box is at 65% full, what happens when it goes to 100% full? Surely, that's a possibility. Surely, it's something that, could not only could happen, but is likely to happen. It's one of those things where the Doctor already, he's already kind of seeing things that something's up here. Something isn't right. It doesn't make enough sense for, for this, for this story to really, to really work. You have the question of, is everything, we have the question of, is it safe? But also, there's the question of, not only is it safe, but, why, what are you going to do with it? And the Doctor's fears are somewhat confirmed pretty early on, with this confirmation that, this confirmation that, something with the person, something with the conversion of the person that they saw goes wrong. He starts to convulse, and he starts to act all weird, and, he essentially is left as, as sort of, I don't want to quite, he's left sort of, kind of as a husk, which, you sort of think, well, if this is what happens, like, why and how, like, it's one of those things that, it isn't, it isn't one of those things that, it's not one of those things that you want. It's, it's one of those things that is just, that you don't trust, and, it's bad, but, and, only the fears are, confirmed when, essentially, the one of the scientists ends up dying, just mysteriously in the machine, near the machine, and not just near the machine, but also just by everything else. Like, things just start not adding up. Then a second scientist dies of drowning, and the doctor gets attacked by the machine, and it essentially looks like it's actually kind of an interesting callback, because what happens to the doctor is that he sees a bunch of flames. Now, that's our big cliffhanger, and that's great. But that's only about really half the episode. You also have this plot built up with Unit, mainly because Unit is there, like Unit does, and they're the one. But Unit is what Unit essentially is there, and Unit causes Unit is in charge of a peace conference, and because of this peace conference, they have to deal with these different delegates, and the Chinese delegate has been having a lot of problems. It turns out the Chinese delegate herself, the captain working with her, is very weird. She spends a lot of time just working up as a working her, sort of causing problems. She ends up burning up some important papers, and she basically just causes a lot of problems. And that's basically, so her plot. Not a lot gets. It doesn't get itself built up too much, but it starts it off. So just sort of the two plot lines really work well together, and they sort of give you intrigue for how they're going to be working completely. They all are really interesting, and they all build on each other, and they keep it. Everything keeps together. So much so that I'm gonna give the Mind of Evil episode 1 a 10 out of 10. All right, it is the 17th of April, 2018, and I just finished watching The Mind of Evil, Episode 2, and this episode is interesting in the fact that it doesn't quite do too much. It does more to develop the Unit storyline than the storyline in the prison, mainly with the whole World Peace Conference going on, and the fact that the Brigadier and his men are in the middle of trying to get this peace conference off the ground, and basically trying to get it to work out correctly, work out for the best, when they're dealing with things of a difficult nature. It's because you have the Chinese delegate who appears to be murdered. So the Brigadier's like, shit, I'm getting the doctor on this because I don't want to have to deal with this murder, because it's a murder, and, well, it's one of the things where it's like, hey, there's nothing really, I can do without having the murder happen. It's so you have the doctor brought back to Unit for most of the episode. Well, whilst what's sort of happening is that is that the is that the doctor then has to go in and talk to the new delegate. While the Brigadier goes in to talk to the new delegate with the doctor, and the doctor says this really nice scene where he sort of tells Mike, yeah, it's just going to be one of those days, isn't it, where everything's just going to go wrong, because Benton, who was following Chin Lee as she burnt the important papers, he lost her, and because she essentially screwed with his head, and basically made him sort of fall unconscious for a moment, which is interesting because you have a lot of these psychic things building up to the reveal that she's actually working for the Master, and the Master's involved. Yeah, and the Master's back after only one story, of course, because he's in every story of this season, except the audio this season that I'm going to cover. More on that one when we get to the audio, which is in, I think, 2 stories' time. But yeah, it's one of those things that is really, really good, is because you have the doctor there, and the doctor sort of has her you have her having this whole point, and you have her going crazy. You also have riots starting to prison. Another prisoner is brought in, working for them, who's also working for them. So his name is Mailer. He's crazy. So basically, you have everything starting to build up. You actually have the Brigadier made a fool of because the doctor can speak Chinese and knows what he's doing. So yeah, everything just sort of builds up to this amazing sort of finale. So I'm going to give The Mind of Evil Episode 2 a 9 out of 10 because it does have a problem with being just a little odd in places, and a little slow with the pacing. And the cliffhanger itself is really weird. It's the American delegate being called by Chin Lee, going to meet the Chinese delegate. Chin Lee shows up and then turns into a dragon. Yeah, it's just weird. Alright, it is the 18th of April 2018, and I just finished watching episode 3 of The Mind of Evil. And this is the one where things go in a weird direction. We have the World Peace Conference plot still simmering in the background. The dragon is explained as a quote-unquote collective hallucination, which is kind of... Well, it doesn't make any sense. It's like the machine... So they all see the dragon, they shoot at the dragon then turns back into Chin Lee, who loses her hypnosis, which the doctor takes. And then the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, I gotta get back to the prison, because Chin Lee reveals that the Master is Emil Keller, who's already gone to the prison and started a riot and put Mailer in charge. Again, this episode is just really weird. Like, everything sort of shifts. But I have to say, it's a good weird. Again, just because something's weird doesn't mean it's bad. Doctor Who does weird very well, a lot. And this is a very weird story. A very good weird story. Like, it's not bad weird, it's good weird. And I like it a lot. Like, it's... Though, I am gonna say that what is kind of interesting is that the levels of weird, not only are they continue, so the doctor makes it back to the prison while Yates has phoned into you to be like, hey, this whole missile thing, yeah, we're back on track, it's gonna be great, everything's great with this missile, nothing bad's gonna happen. Spoiler alert, something bad's probably going to happen with the missile, just because it's a Doctor Who story. But yeah, and then the Doctor goes back to the prison. A riot has started. Joe and Dr. Summers are locked up in a cell. Barnum has sort of reveals himself to be completely childlike instead of his hardened criminal self. She's got this whole thing. He thinks nothing's fine, and then the Doctor tries to save Joe, but then the Master ties him up and sets the machine on him, which sort of gives us to the cliffhanger, which is a bunch of past monsters appearing in the Doctor's mind. And this is the first episode. Terror of the Autons was a story that had some decent Doctor-Master banter, but this one this story just has so much better banter. Like, Delgado and Pertwee just go at each other with, like, they're, like, quick-timed, and they're really, really good at just, like, bantering back and forth, and I find that hilarious. Like, they are great, and the cliffhanger is amazing. Again, my big complaint, that the Dragon of the Beneath just doesn't make any sense. So I'm also, like I did with episode 2, the Mind of Evil episode 3 is getting a 9 out of 10. Alright, it is the 23rd of April, 2018. I apologize again for having late episodes. Life just caught up to me, and things got in the way of me recording for 3 or 4 days. For 4 days, the entire weekend block. I'm sorry about that. But we're back with the Mind of Evil, episode 4. And this episode just continues. This episode is amazing. Like, you have this really... essentially you have the Chinese subplot pretty much ended. So now you can just sort of enjoy the Doctor and the Master bantering. And that's really where this story gets itself... as a really solid, fun story. Like, this is because Roger Delgado and John Pertwee are such good actors that they bounce off of each other perfectly, and they know just about, you get this sense that they are really, really good. Like, you have the Master, he's, like the Terror of the Autons, he is made an alliance with this mind parasite thing, and he's convinced himself that the Doctor is going to help him come hell or high water. The Doctor is going to help him help him use this mind parasite to control the world, the titular Mind of Evil. And, he can't control it. Like, he has the prison put up. He locks the Doctor and Joe in a cell, has the Doctor passed out. Joe tries to give him an aspirin to save him. And we get this really interesting tidbit that, as a Time Lord, he can't have aspirin. Which I find, like, just an interesting addition to the mythos, because it's one of those things where it's like, that's something different. Their biologies would be different. It makes mostly sense that the Doctor may not necessarily be able to have the same medications as us humans from Earth, as us Earthmen. And, that's something that's really, really good. And we get a big insight into the Master's plan, that he's also planning to hijack the World Peace Conference by stealing a missile, a nuclear missile, which is being transported at the same time. But we also get an interesting insight into the Master's psyche, is that his biggest fear is the Doctor laughing at him. As you can see by the picture I've used to represent this episode, it's the Doctor in this rather creepy apparition laughing over him as he's cowering in fear. Which it's sort of that this one scene just sort of builds so much respect for both their characters, the Doctor and the Master. and it sort of really makes the Master well-rounded. And this is one of those stories that a lot of people overlooked because it hasn't been in color. I'm of course watching the color version on the DVD, done with amazing colorizations by Stuart Humphries for episode 1, and the Doctor Restoration team for the rest of the episodes. They were all the episodes look fantastic. Also, it just doesn't help. It also helps that Tim Coombe directs, but that's really what I want to focus on, is that the Doctor and the Master are very similar people. They have the same sort of psyche, which I find fascinating. Especially, just because they're really, they're interesting characters together. They're an interesting sort of dichotomy. So, because of that, I'm going to give The Mind of Evil episode 4 a perfect 10 out of 10. And hopefully, I'll be back tomorrow for episode 5, and we can actually get this out before Wednesday. Alright, it is the 24th of April 2018, and I just finished watching The Mind of Evil episode 5. This episode it's great, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit weird as well, in the fact that, well, unlike the previous episodes, it sort of has this odd structure that it sort of is building, it's building towards a finale. There's several points where it feels like the cliffhanger's coming, but it never comes until it just builds and builds, and we get a really good cliffhanger. Essentially, we pick up from the cliffhanger for episode 4 with the Keller machine moving around, and a lot of the episode is the Doctor basically being held at gunpoint, being forced to help the Master into stopping the Keller machine from destroying everyone, and what's happening is, as the Keller machine is, doing its Keller machiney things, if that's probably the best way to put it, is that it's creating basically a bunch of problems for the Doctor. Like, it's starting to move it's creating problems for the Master, and the Doctor has to go through essentially the cliffhanger to episode 2 with all the episode 3 with the villains being all sort of it was a bit in episode 3 with the villains all being shown across him as he takes his ring, and with this he gets it to stay in place, but at the cost that, well, now he's accidentally helped, well, not accidentally, he's helped the Master in his plans. He's not on the side of good here. He is doing something that is, wrong. He's letting the Master win, and you don't really know how, like, the Master does the smart thing and locks the Doctor back up, like, with Mailer, keeping guard on him, and, if they try to escape, just shoot him on sight. Of course, knowing that the Doctor wouldn't, if he was going to try to escape, he would probably either find a way out or, not try to escape at all. And he doesn't. Well, the Master then goes off to deal with the whole missile plot and try to steal the missile, which is interesting. An interesting part of the plot in and of itself, mainly because you have this plot going, this plot who's going to get to the missile first and who's going to take it and keep it, for who's going to be able to destroy, to use it. Meanwhile, you have a lot of stuff with UNIT essentially working on getting the missile back as their first priority and rescuing the Doctor, and which is really what brings us to the climax of the episode is, we have this scene where we have this Sergeant Caldwell, who's sort of a joke character, I guess. He's like, I don't think he's in any other story. He's just in this story as just a random UNIT guy, and he's not meant to be taken seriously. He's kind of a complete, I don't want to say idiot, but yeah, he's kind of a complete idiot for quite a lot of this. Like, he makes all these jokes, and and the Brigadier puts Mike Yates in charge of getting the plan out to break out to get the missile, while he's in charge of the plan to break the Doctor out of prison and meet up with them. And then Benton comes in with concussion and demands help with the missions, which is it's just this sequence of scenes that is really good at building UNIT up as like a real strong group of people, because that's what they do. They have their they have their bonds, and the Brigadier reluctantly lets Benton help out, which I find amazing. I love what Benton does in this episode. And then you have the plan to break the Doctor out of prison, which is just this amazing sequence of actions. It starts with the van, with the Brigadier pulling up to prison. He's in work clothes. He rings the bell. He says, "Oh, I'm bringing food." And there is alcohol. And he's doing this in like this sort of Cockney-ish accent, which is already funny because it's Nick Courtney doing a Cockney accent. He convinces the people to let him in. The van goes in, and then boom, prison break, chaos starts happening. It's a great action scene that I won't try to spoil, but the cliffhanger is Mailer realizing the accident happens, has the Doctor and Joe, leads them out of their cell, is going to try to take them out the back way. They won't go, so he fires, and then he fires his gun. We hear the gunshot, cut to credits, and that's just the end of the episode. So that is just one amazing cliffhanger. Just sort of everything in this episode builds up to amazing. So I'm going to give The Mind of Evil episode 5 another 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 25th of April 2018, and I just finished watching episode 6 of The Mind of Evil. And I have to say that this episode is one that I have a slight problem with. Mainly in the fact that as an episode, it has a problem of not quite knowing how to fix its plot. Don Houghton's writing, he wrote really well, and he does a really good job of intertwining all the stories together. And I think the climax works partially, but it also feels, and it's very, very good that in the story, the Doctor doesn't entirely win, and the Master actually gets away, and has the chance to go off into time and space and continue to be evil. Like, he gets his dematerialization circuit back. But I would call that a bad move. Mostly because this is one of the as an episode, not even just as an episode, doing that sort of makes it easy, almost it. Well, yes, this would have been watched. The episode would have aired 6 weeks after the end of Terror of the Autons. It's still the very next story. It still hasn't been that long for the characters to sort of leave the Master on Earth. I probably would have. If I was doing this, I probably would have done another story before, either done another story before this one, with the Master, or left it for the next story. Though I know what the next story is, so that's, and that sort of has the Master all in it and already as a, in space. And of course, yeah, spoilers. The Master's comes back in the very next televised story, and it's not necessarily bad, but it's, it could have been done a little more interesting. You have part of, which is just, it's because part of the problem here is that the Master, as a character, hasn't had really as much time to prove that he is, he sort of has really outsmarted the Doctor. He just sort of, it's like, well, I've outsmarted you this time, haha. I'm taking my circuit back. I think that Barnum as a character, sort of loses a little bit of something by the end of this episode, because this episode really just sort of sets him up so he can die. Like, there's nothing really there to be like, oh, well, now you don't have, you are just here because, we need a character to kill off, and you're the easiest character to do it with, which is really a shame, because, well, he's the character is a decent character. Like, he's a very, very good person. He's got a lot of backstory to him. And Barnum and he has really good chemistry with Joe. They just work off very well with each other. But it's one of those things where I don't. I'm not too broken up about it, but still, they could have done with him some more stuff with him that maybe would have made him feel like a more well-rounded, like given him a happy ending. Just because it's something that that is really really not the most not the easiest to do. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and give The Mind of Evil episode 6 a 9 out of 10, knocking off the point off because again, it's a really good episode. Like, this episode is great. Like, the Doctor and the Brigadier have amazing chemistry together in it. The Master's amazing in it. It's just the little bit of plot things, like the sort of, we've got it, like, I don't really blame the writer. I feel like this might be Terrence Dicks's fault, mainly and Barry Lettsell, because they have an idea for the season, so they're like, well, you need to have this in, and so the writer may have just written it in at the last minute. So I'm going to give it Mind of Evil 6 gets a 9 out of 10. And of course, because this is the last episode of The Mind of Evil, we average up the scores for the entire story to give The Mind of Evil a final score of 9.5 out of 10. Thank you once again, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment if you haven't already, and subscribe. Again, I am sorry about this being out so late. Life just caught up with me. Hopefully, at least the next couple episodes may be out on time. I don't know. I do have exams, but the next episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon will be the next televised Doctor Who story in The Claws of Axos.